Hi guys, Andrea Mills here. For the month of January, I wanted to make a few videos on, I was calling it clarity and motivation, because in January, that's the start of the new year, and we're all thinking about changes we want to make in our lives, and making resolutions and things like that. So I wanted to talk on that topic this month, and here it is, close to the end of the month. I'm finally getting around to it. I've had this thought in my mind for about a month of what I wanted to share, and yet now that I'm actually sitting down to do it, I know that there's going to be things I forget that I wanted to say, and I just hope that I hope I get all of it out there. These kinds of talks are always very emotionally exhausting for me. I think it's very important to me to share meaningful things with people, but at the same time, I'm a very, what's the word? I don't know if private's the right word, but it's hard for me to expose my inner self to other people, especially when there's so many people and they're not always kind in response to it. And so I think that's one of the reasons I find myself putting these kinds of videos off, because of that, I don't know, those feelings of, it just is tiring for me, but this is the most important things to talk about, so I know it has to be done, but I find myself wanting to fall back on the easy things like doing vlogs, because doesn't feel as putting myself out there as these kind of talks. But anyway, so today I'm hoping to do one video on clarity, one on more of the motivation, and then one on Q&A for the things that you guys have asked me about on those topics. So today I'm going to talk about clarity. And as I said, this is the time of the year when we're all thinking about how we want to change our lives for the better and making plans for how we're going to accomplish that. And so the first part of that I wanted to talk about is how to be perfect. And I think that might be what I use for my title. I'm not sure. But anyways, that's why we all want to do these kinds of things, because we want to perfect ourselves, make ourselves the best possible selves, or our lives the best possible lives that we can have. But there's two different definitions of perfect. I think I've actually talked on this topic before, but our tendency and what the culture tells us, perfection is something that is outward in a sense. I'm not sure if that's what I want to say, but outward in that how you look, how your how others perceive you, not making mistakes, that kind of perfection. But the actual word perfect, especially as used like in the Bible, it doesn't mean that same thing. It doesn't mean without mistakes or without blemish, although those things can be metaphorical for it, in that like when in the sacrificial system of the Old Testament, the animal that they sacrificed had to be perfect. It had to be unblemished. It couldn't have any physical flaws. But the reality was that was just a demonstration of a spiritual truth, just like all of this whole physical world we live in is just a living metaphor to teach us about spiritual realities that we can't see with our eyes. And when Jesus came as the true sacrifice, he was not perfect in the physical sense of being unblemished, but in spirit he was perfect. He was sinless. He didn't do wrong things. And that is more the meaning of what perfect means. It's actually maturity. It's coming to a place of completeness or wholeness. And maturity is, well, think about a physical, like a person who's mature. In you grow up, you're a baby, and then you reach adulthood, and then you reach old age, and what you look like at old age is perfection. It's maturity. It's the finished product that looks nothing like the 20-year-old self. But in our way of thinking, we want to say the 20-year-old body is perfect, and the 80-year-old body is imperfect, but truthfully, again, this is actually a heart issue. Perfection is reaching maturity. So what does this have to do with making resolutions and improving your life? It's that how important it is to make sure that the goals that you're setting, that I'm setting for myself, I mean, this is something I think about a lot, is which sort of perfection am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to achieve outward physical perfection, or am I trying to achieve inward spiritual perfection? And even that, I don't mean becoming a holier than thou type of person, but I mean, am I completing or doing the work God has for me in my time in this world? It's so easy to focus on, I want to lose weight, or I want to get organized, or something like that, which have their place, but those are the wrong kind of perfection to be focusing on. Partly because those kinds of goals objectify yourself, and you turn yourself into a machine or an object, and the goal becomes to look like you're 20 for the rest of your life, to be the same size. Like, that has any relevance whatsoever, but that's kind of how we start to think. Like, if you start to gain weight, I need to lose that weight because I'm an object that doesn't change. I'm a machine that shouldn't change, instead of realizing I'm a living person who's never going to be the same from one time to the next. And we also start to have a lot of negative self-talk associated with that objectification. When we make mistakes or don't meet our goals or whatever, it's very easy to come down on yourself and be like, for instance, let's say for me, I've been sleeping way later lately than I would like to, but I know that I mean, it's just the reality of the life that I'm living right now, that I can't get up that early. I don't get enough hours of sleep in the night. And if I was trying to perfect myself, I would have a schedule that says I have to get up at this time, and this comes at this hour, and this comes at that hour, and any variation from that is a failure. And I would talk to myself about how I've messed up, or how I've not met the mark, how I'm not measuring up to what I think I should. And that is turning me into an object, because I'm supposed to conform to something outward. It's like in the Bible, there's somewhere, I don't know where it's at. This is where Tom is good. He's really good at knowing exactly where to find something in the Bible. I'm just like a more general, I get the gist kind of a person. But there's somewhere where Jesus or someone says that the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath. The idea being that God gave rest. Well, it was a living metaphor, for one thing, to represent the fact that there was life after our earthly time. In the book of Hebrews, it talks about that it was looking forward to a new country, a heavenly home. So living the Sabbath on earth was a living metaphor for what was coming at the resurrection. But in a more temporary nature, the Sabbath was that day of rest where we got to take a break from work. But it became very legalistic in that people were having to conform to the Sabbath in a very legalistic way. And that was the point, that the Sabbath was made for us. We weren't made for the Sabbath. Legalism really doesn't have an appropriate place in our lives. And that's kind of what happens, I think, a lot of times with us. When we want to perfect ourselves the wrong way, we become very legalistic toward ourselves and toward others. And we really berate ourselves for not being perfect. And the true perfection comes with the maturity of acknowledging that I'm a human being, and some days I'm not going to feel like getting up. Some days I'm going to need more rest. I'm a whole person. And I was thinking about this the other day. I might be all over the place, I don't know, but the whole idea of holistic health care, that we want to think about the whole person, not just this disease. But yet how many times our attempt to have a holistic method for dealing with something becomes very unholistic because we let that thing still become all out of proportion with the rest of our lives. And sometimes that's what happens when we set goals for ourselves, I think, is that we let that weight loss goal or that, that schedule or whatever it is take on a life of its own, so that we forget that we're human beings and we're trying to force ourselves to conform to something that may or may not actually matter. And we're treating ourselves, and we do it to our children and to our husbands, we treat them like objects that need to get on board. It's really easy to let culture dictate for us what is supposed to matter to us. And it's a further objectification, because culture objectifies humanity, and then we take that on for ourselves and we objectify ourselves, and we start setting priorities for ourselves that if someone else externally hadn't told us was important, we wouldn't really care about. This is something that I had to deal with in that area of weight, because I really struggled. Like, I was always very thin when I was young, and then somewhere, it was really after my mom died, I think there was a lot of stress and things, and I just started gaining weight, and I really didn't, like, the more I tried to follow the rules to lose it, the worse it got. And it was a real struggle for me because I felt really bad about myself. I was reading all sorts of things. I was trying all sorts of diets. I was, I don't know. I was just objectifying myself, really, is what it boils down to. Because in my head, you have to look a certain way, be a certain weight, and if you're not, you're less than perfect. And it was through all of that and all that reading and coming across so much conflicting information and really digging into it that I came to a peace one day that this is not important. It's not important in my life, and I'm making it very important. And if I didn't feel pressure to conform to something I didn't care about, I wouldn't be worrying about this. So what if I just accept who I am, the way I am, and let that go? And it was such a freeing thing. It was amazing. And I feel like that with all of us. There's areas in our life, whether we're homeschool moms trying to conform to whatever, turning our kids into geniuses, or in that whole area of appearance, or, having the house that looks just right. We take on all these priorities that honestly don't matter to us personally, and it really just sucks the joy out of life. And that's one of the things I'm hoping to encourage in this whole talk on clarity, is to find your own priorities, and the best you can, stop caring if you conform to what everybody else thinks that you should be doing. This is one of the things that has always helped me, that there's going to be a day when I am nearing the end of my life, and I'm going to reflect back, and I'm sure it will happen many times, and what is going to matter to me then, that's what my priorities should be. And I can't imagine myself looking back and thinking, boy, I really fit into that skirt when I was 40 that I wanted to fit into. I'm so proud of myself. I'm not going to care. My grandfriend said this the other day. She says, you just stop caring when you realize things don't matter. And I'm like, it's so true. We care so much about things that don't matter because somebody else tells us that it matters. But when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter. For Tom and I, we had set priorities for ourselves that the work God gave us is to take care of our family. And that first means the children in our own home. They're the top priority. Second is going to be our parents and grandparents, helping them with what they need, and then our extended family, and then our brothers and sisters in Christ, and then that extends on to just humankind in general. But then we had to also think about what kind of perfection do we want to achieve in our family? Do we want to achieve an outward perfection or an inward one? And that meant that we stopped caring about stuff like whether or not our kids were, sports stars or in clubs or whatever. And not that those things are bad. It's just that those kinds of things cease to have value to us. What did start to matter to us as we thought about these things was that no matter what our kids do someday, they're always going to be part of a family, and perfecting them that way, that maturity of being selfless and giving to each other, that's what we wanted to focus our time and effort on. And so those became our priorities of teaching our kids to love each other and to set aside their own selfish desires, I guess. Not that you can't have your own ideas or desires or whatever, but that we all live in a family, and I hope that we've demonstrated that for you guys, that everyone's valuable, everyone's needs are valuable, and we do our best to meet all of the needs and not let one person or a couple of people dominate the whole family. That we all have to learn how to sacrifice some of what we want for the whole family, but at the same time, the family then meets the needs of each individual person. So that really became our priority. And that dictated then for us what kinds of activities we were going to participate in. It really narrowed, I guess, the choices for us, which is a good thing, because there's some weird thing that we all, I think, succumb to in some sense, of thinking that we have infinite time, infinite resources, infinite energy, and so we try to be involved in way more things than we actually can comfortably do. And at the same time, we're trying to achieve that outward perfection of looking like the perfect family. And in the process, we destroy maturity and the true perfection because we're exhausted and meeting all these standards and doing all these things that we don't actually even care about. And really it just takes the joy out. I feel like, when I've been thinking about all this stuff, I had so many more deeper thoughts than I'm sharing right now that I wanted to say. But this is always what happens. I start talking and then it's like, what was all those wonderful things that I wanted to share with you all? So, oh well, it's going to be imperfect. Hopefully it helps you think, even if it doesn't get as in depth as I was hoping to. But the next idea is how easy it is to put up obstacles to your true goals. Here's an example. Recently, someone told me that they wanted to lose 20 pounds. And I asked, why? Why do you want to lose 20 pounds? And what it came down to was the person felt like they were not connecting well enough with their kids. And if they lost a little weight, they would feel more energetic and maybe connect better, playing and things with their kids. And I was like, just think about that for a minute. The ultimate goal is to build a better relationship with your child. The method of doing that is to lose 20 pounds. That doesn't mesh at all in my brain. That looks like a huge obstacle to meeting the goal, not a stepping stone to meeting the goal. If the object is to have a better relationship with your child, I could think of a lot of ways that would be a more direct route to that, like, setting aside time every week to sit down and hang out with them, or starting to make sure to invite them along when you're going to run an errand so that you guys can visit while you're in the car, or, setting up a family game night so you can spend time with them, starting to do read alouds or something like that, or a bedtime routine where you're actually directly interacting with your child. All of those things seem like a more direct route to me to developing a better relationship with your child than losing 20 pounds. Another thing that I think is true for a lot of us, when we feel lonely, there's this desire to connect with people. It's a God-given desire. We need to connect with people. But one of the biggest barriers is the state of our homes. So we will set the goal of getting our house cleaned up or organized or whatever, so that we can start inviting people over. But that is a huge obstacle for meeting that goal. And so here's what I would say. If your goal is to connect with people and have them over, start inviting people over. Don't worry about the house. You're actually going to start having people in your life right away. It's not going to be, a year or 2 years or 5 years down the road. So you're going to start meeting the goal immediately. But it's also going to give you the motivation after the fact to make the changes that are necessary. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of times for me, I will think these are the steps I need to take, or these are the priorities that I need to have before I start something. But once I'm actually in the middle of it, I realize, a lot of that stuff was irrelevant. For instance, with our house, there's a lot of projects we wanted to do with our house. If we had done everything in the beginning that we wanted to do, our house wouldn't work nearly as well for us, because we had no clue what it was going to be like living in a small house with a big family beforehand. Once we're in the middle of it, it's very clear what steps we need to take to make things work better for us. So that desire to perfect outward perfection first, before we start actually achieving the goal we want of making those human connections, is a huge obstacle. And once you start making the human connections, you're going to have a lot of clarity about what things you actually need to work on to make that whole thing run more smoothly. For us homeschool moms, I think one of the things that we tend to do is we want to have everything set up for school before we get started. And so we want to have this nice classroom, and we want to have all the curriculum lined out, and all these things, and then we're going to start. But a lot of times, if you just get started, then it becomes clear what things actually are going to be necessary and what things aren't. And we save ourselves a lot of time and effort and money by letting the needs dictate what the priorities are, instead of trying to perfect it all ahead of time and then get started. I think one of the biggest hindrances for getting organized too is that we try to organize, well, not organize, but we want to have everything we're going to need in the future. And so then we hang on to everything, and it never happens. Like, we can't ever get organized because we're always looking down the road. And so our desire to be prepared becomes a huge obstacle to us actually getting organized. And if we just could accept the world, the life that we have right now, and keep the things we need right now, we could trust that God would provide what we need when that time comes, and we would actually make a lot of progress on getting organized. It's when we have to, we have all these ideals of what we want to accomplish in life, and so then it's so easy to collect things that we think we're going to need for whatever those things are, and then we're not doing them. Then life right now isn't very great because there's too much mess around, but it's so hard to let go, because our mind or our ideals say, well, someday I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, and so I can't get rid of this stuff. Believe me, I know exactly what that's like. But if we could just stop putting obstacles in our way to achieving the goals that we have that actually matter to us, we would get there. We could start living that life today that we want to. And that's one of the things. This is going to be very personal and private and not necessarily for kids' ears, but there was a time when I was going through my struggles with how I felt about myself and my weight, where I was putting up barriers to intimacy with Tom. And in my mind, I was not attractive, and I needed to become attractive to enjoy, or for us to enjoy things together. And one day I just said to myself, what if I just stopped? It's not like there's a better option at this point. This is who I am right now, and do I want to be a person who waits until I've achieved whatever perfection to start enjoying my life, my husband? No. And I certainly don't want him to suffer because of my own insecurities. I'm just going to set that aside. I'm going to set that obstacle aside and start living the joyful life with him right now that I want to live. And believe me, it made life so much better for both of us. That desire for physical perfection, for objectification of ourselves, for meeting some sort of cultural norm that we think norm, is such a huge obstacle to being the person you want to actually be and to living the life that you actually want to live. I remember at one time being very unhappy. Like every day I was just in a bad mood, and I was just always grumpy about stuff. And one day I just said to myself, what's wrong with me? Like, this is what I always wanted to be. I always wanted to be a mom. I wanted to stay home. I wanted to homeschool my kids. I'm living the life that I wanted to live, yet I am not happy. Why is that? And I realized it's because in my mind, I can't have things being imperfect. If the kids misbehave, or I don't have the house that I want to live in, or I don't know, there's probably lots of other things that are just not coming to my mind. But I had like this mental list of things that need to be perfect before I could start enjoying my life. And one day it just, it hits me. It's never going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. So what if I just set that stuff aside and start enjoying the life that I have right now? It made all the difference in the world. Health can be a real issue in that way too, that when we have this idea that we have to always feel good, feel happy, feel in control, that we can't enjoy ourselves. It becomes so, we get so hyper focused on the fact that I have aches and pains, or I don't know, my head is stuffy, or whatever it is. Like, we let these physical imperfections in that health sense also keep us from enjoying life. And no one's ever going to have perfect health. It's never going to happen. So what if we just set that aside? I was that way with my jaw when I was in high school. I was in a minor car accident with my cousins, and it hurt my neck, and within a few months I developed TMJ, to the point that I remember one day being at Burger King and I was going to eat a little flat hamburger like that big, and I could not open my mouth wide enough to put it into my mouth, and my jaw always ached. It was horrible. And so I went to, well, what ultimately happened is one day I just forced it open and it popped, and a dentist told me I'd actually popped it like out of the joint sort of, and it had worn a new groove. But for years, so I went to so many chiropractors and dentists, and I tried home remedies, exercises, different appliances, herbs, all sorts of things, and my jaw was not getting better. I mean, it wasn't getting worse. It wasn't, I don't know. But one day I just said to myself, what if I just accepted the fact that I'm going to die someday with a jaw that doesn't work quite right? Can I accept that? And I realized I could. And I could just move on with life. And I stopped going to the different people to try to get help. And you know what? It stopped bothering me. It didn't like stop literally bothering me. I still sometimes have a sore jaw that Tom will massage, especially when I have a lot of tension. But it didn't have the power over me that it had before. It stopped being an obstacle to me being able to enjoy life. When you can tolerate physical imperfection, you find you get a little closer to true perfection, to maturity. One of the things that is really important is that when we stop objectifying ourselves and demanding perfection from ourselves, we can extend that to other people, and it makes us a much more loving person. And in that area of having a house that is perfect before we have company come over, if we start inviting people over, and regardless of what condition our homes are in, and just say, you know what, I want to connect with you, I want to be friends with you, come over to my house. And when they walk in the door, we don't say, I'm sorry about the mess. Do you know what that would do to people, to relationships? Because as soon as we start apologizing, for one thing, if they can't come over at all, we're not going to make any progress. If we start apologizing when they come over, that sends the message that you're making me uncomfortable by seeing that I'm imperfect. And that means that they also need to feel uncomfortable if you know that they're not perfect. And you perpetuate that cycle of, we only allow perfection here, and if you're not perfect, you should feel really bad about yourself. But if we stop apologizing and just welcome them in with open arms, sit down and have a nice afternoon together, and stop worrying about it, it's gonna go so far to achieving that goal of friendship that we all want and desire. So that kind of leads into my last point, is that it's about setting boundaries. None of us have unlimited time, unlimited resources, unlimited knowledge. We all have to operate within a finite amount of all of these things, and it's not the same from one person to the other, and we need to stop feeling guilty for not being godlike, for not having infinite everything. In a practical sense, what that looks like is sitting down and making a list of all the good things that you want to do in life and all those goals that we have, whether it's for ourselves or our kids or our families or whatever it is. List it all, and then start looking, step outside of it and think, what matters most to me? And what of these things are obstacles to my real goal instead of actually helping me achieve it? And prioritize. So let's say I can only, maybe we need to break it down a little more. Categorize things first. Things that have to do with activities that the family's involved in, or ways that we want to spend our free time. I remember one time doing this, and I estimated that I needed 36 hours a day to accomplish everything I wanted to accomplish. Clearly that couldn't happen. I just literally had to laugh at myself and say, okay, so what actually is the most important thing here? And when you start prioritizing, number 1 is this, number 2 is this, number 3 is this, you can generally stop at the top 3. What are my top 3 things that I personally care about, that bring me joy, that fulfill what I believe my life purpose is? You can graciously let go of the rest of that and appreciate other people who have those things as priorities, but stop beating yourself up if they're not your priorities, because you have your priorities, and those are things that need to get your time and attention. So first off is that setting the boundaries on what types of things I'm going to do, how much time I'm going to devote to these things. That's a big one for me. Like, I really enjoy planning birthday parties for the kids. And I don't think that this is something that everyone has to do or should do. It's just something I personally really enjoy doing. But I still set limits on how much time I'm willing to spend preparing for the party, how much money I'm willing to spend on the party. And when I have those boundaries set in place, it makes it a lot easier to make decisions about what we're actually going to do for the party. So that's something that has to be set ahead of time, because when there are no boundaries, we head towards that perfectionism again of wanting to be outwardly pleasing and have the best Pinterest whatever, and there's no end point. There's a phrase, like an eating disorder phrase, called orthorexia nervosa, and it's the obsession with healthful eating. And I was definitely on my way to that at one point in my life, because when you don't set boundaries, something can become all-consuming in your life, so that it literally overtakes everything else and crowds out other really important things. So first, prioritize what matters to me. Stop objectifying yourself and stop objectifying other people. I'm not a robot. I'm not a thing. It's okay to not be physically perfect. In fact, you're a much better person probably if you're not. If you're worrying more or putting your energy more to relationships and service and things that actually matter than to things that are huge obstacles to being a mature, perfect person. And as I said, literally take the time to write down these things. Talk it over. Tom and I did that. We talked over what actually, here's this big long list of things that we would like to do with the kids, or we would like to do with our homeschool, or whatever. But what's our top 3? And if we can worry about the top 3 and forget about the rest, it's going to make life so much easier for us and so much more joyful, because we're not spreading ourselves thin. We're setting boundaries of what we're going to do. And maybe someday our priorities will change. Things change. But for right now, this is what we're going to focus on. This is how much we're willing to devote, how much resources we're willing to devote to this, so that further sets boundaries on what we're going to do. I feel like there's one more important thing I wanted to say on that topic, but it's flown out of my brain. So I hope you got something out of that on finding clarity about you and your life, and not feeling like you have to be everything to everyone to be perfect. You need to just be perfect, real perfect, achieve real perfection, real love, real service, real maturity. Stop worrying about what you look like on the outside, whether that's your body, your home, or your family, whether you got it all together. That's irrelevant. And you're going to find a lot more joy in life, and maybe have a different set of goals for the coming year than you would have otherwise. So thank you guys for coming over and hanging out with me today. I'm going to, as I said, hopefully talk a little more on motivation, and then the Q&A video coming up. So I guess that's it for now. I'll talk to you again soon.